When you think about therapy, what's the first thing that pops into your head? Is it some specific technique or maybe a big dramatic breakthrough moment? Well, what if I told you that the single most critical part of successful therapy isn't a technique at all? It's actually something much more fundamental: the human connection, the rapport that's built between a counselor and their client. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. So, take a look at this picture. What's the most important thing happening here? It's not the room, it's not the chairs. The most important thing is totally invisible. It's that bond of trust and safety that's being woven between these two people. That connection, that's the real bedrock of the entire counseling process. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to dig into why this relationship is the absolute foundation of everything. Then, we'll zoom in on those critical first few moments of the first conversation. After that, we'll get into the core strategies for building that trust, see how it unlocks the whole counseling journey, and finally, we'll talk about how counselors protect this really vital connection. Okay, let's start right at the beginning. You see, the counseling process is a journey, and it has these distinct stages. And there's a very, very good reason why building rapport is always step one. Because without it, nothing else, the goal setting, the hard work, the healing, none of it can really happen effectively. A really great way to picture this is to think about building a house. The relationship, that rapport, is the concrete foundation. You can have the most advanced tools, the most brilliant architectural plans, but if that foundation of trust isn't solid and secure, the whole thing is just, well, it's at risk of falling apart. Everything else rests on it. So, what do we actually mean when we say therapeutic rapport? It's really about creating a specific kind of environment, a space that is safe, supportive, and completely non-judgmental. It's about getting to a place where a client feels they can be totally vulnerable, explore anything and everything, and truly know, that they won't be judged or rejected for it. So, how does a counselor actually start laying down this foundation? It all begins in the first few minutes. We're talking about the very first session. Those initial moments are incredibly important. It's so easy to overlook these first few steps, but they are unbelievably powerful. It starts with something as basic as a warm, genuine greeting, a clear introduction of who they are and what their role is. And maybe most importantly, that explicit promise. This is a safe, confidential space. These aren't just pleasantries, they are deliberate moves that set the tone for everything that comes after. And a simple statement, just like this one, can make a world of difference. When a counselor acknowledges a client's courage, it does two huge things at once. It validates their decision to even be there, and it immediately positions the counselor as an ally, not just some clinical expert. Now, this is a really fundamental technique that helps empower the client right from the start. A closed question, like, "Have you been feeling sad?" Well, that just gets you a yes or a no. But an open-ended question, like, "How have you been feeling lately?" That does something much more powerful. It throws the doors wide open. It invites a story, not just a simple data point. Okay, so the conversation's off the ground. Now, what are the ongoing skills that counselors use to really deepen that trust? This is where we get into the real art of connection. This image is just a perfect metaphor for what's going on. So often, our thoughts and our feelings can feel like this impossibly tangled mess. The goal of counseling is to help carefully untangle all of that. But for a client to even let a counselor get near that tangle, they have to trust them completely. So let's break down these foundational skills. It all kicks off with active listening. And I mean, this is so much more than just not talking. It's hearing the words, but also the tone, the emotion, and the body language behind them. Then that listening gets turned into empathy and validation. This means reflecting what you're hearing back to the client, showing them that you actually get it. And for a lot of people, this might be the very first time they've ever felt truly heard. And finally, you've got nonverbal communication. Little things like open body language can say so much more about safety and warmth than words ever could. To see how all this works in the real world, let's meet John. He's come to counseling feeling totally hopeless and helpless. He's lost interest in things he used to love. This is exactly the kind of situation where building that initial trust is absolutely everything. So how did John's counselors start? Not with some complicated diagnosis or intervention. Nope. They started with those core skills we just talked about. They listened, really listened, to his story. They validated his feelings, letting him know that what he was feeling was real and understandable. And they showed genuine empathy. That's what created the safe space John needed to really start opening up. And that trust gets even deeper with these other key strategies. We're talking about treating the client with total respect and acceptance. It's about shifting the whole dynamic from expert and patient to a collaborative team that's working together. And it's also about being transparent and authentic, letting the client connect with a real, trustworthy person. So once that foundation of trust is really firmly in place, what happens next? Well, this is where the structured work of counseling can truly begin. And it's so important to understand this point. Establishing rapport isn't the end goal of therapy. It's the key. It's the key that unlocks the door to everything else that needs to happen. It's what makes the entire journey of healing and growth actually possible. Look at this chart. It maps out the entire counseling process. And just notice what comes first, before anything else. Building rapport. It's only after that foundation is set that you can move on to setting goals, creating a plan, and implementing strategies. It is the absolute, non-negotiable first step. So let's go back to our case study, John. Because he trusted his counselor, they were then able to work together as a team to set goals, to develop a concrete treatment plan using methods like cognitive behavioral therapy, and to track his progress. The trust enabled all of the work that followed. All right, we're on to our final section, and it answers a really important question. How do counselors actually manage the immense emotional weight of their work? Because the answer is crucial for maintaining the client's trust for the long haul. Which brings us to a question you might have been wondering about. With all this deep listening and empathy, how in the world do counselors avoid becoming completely overwhelmed? How do they stop themselves from taking on all of their clients' pain and just burning out? Well, the answer lies in a set of core professional strategies. It starts with a deep self-awareness of their own emotions. It involves setting very clear professional boundaries about their role. It demands a real commitment to their own self-care to prevent burnout. And it means seeking regular supervision and consultation to process the intense work that they do day in and day out. And here we come to a really fascinating paradox. You might think that professional boundaries would create distance, but in therapy, they do the exact opposite. They create safety. They create reliability. They let the client know that their counselor is a stable, professional, and dependable presence, which ultimately strengthens that foundation of trust. So let's end with this thought. We've talked all about how counselors build trust through active listening, empathy, and clear boundaries. But here's the big takeaway. These are not just clinical skills. They are fundamentally human skills. So the question for all of us is, what's one small step you can take today? Maybe it's as simple as truly listening without planning what you're going to say next, to build a stronger foundation of trust in your own important relationships.